There's a lot of money going into Instagram influencer marketing. If you were to add 300,000 people that say, these people are working. Maybe they're making $30, $40, $50,000. If winner take all, if we were to publish our own stats on this, I would argue that these stats would actually be much higher.
We're going to talk about Instagram and basically some interesting stats out here about how much money is being spent on Instagram influencer marketing. We've spoken a lot on the show, just on the last couple episodes, about how metrics like GDP, metrics like the unemployment rate or labor force participation rate aren't accurate because of platform economies that aren't being factored into these traditional metrics. So one of the things we're going to look at today is Instagram. Instagram was part of 93% of all influencer marketing campaigns in the last year. In 2020, advertisers are predicted to spend $2.4 billion on Instagram influencer marketing. Marketers around the world, I'll highlight this, spent more than $5 billion on influencer marketing on Instagram in 2018. The fashion industry looks like the largest sponsor with 25% of all sponsored posts. And you can see some of, food and entertainment and some of the other categories. This is interesting. So there's 1.4 million accounts with over 15,000 followers. That can include brands and company accounts. But that's a lot of accounts, 1.5 million content creators, these producers. Another set here. So this kind of shows influencer marketing global spend. So in 2019, they're predicting, this was published a few years ago, between $4 to $8 billion. So the point is, look, there's a lot of money going into Instagram influencer marketing. Now, what does that really mean? You could have sponsored posts where if now you post something to Instagram and now you're promoting that to get in front of more eyeballs and get more engagement. Okay, that's a part of influencer marketing. The thing I want to focus on are basically the deals that are happening outside of Instagram, where you are going directly to a content creator and saying, hey, they had a stat in here about Kylie Jenner, getting paid millions of dollars for one post, right? That money's not going through Instagram. I'd say that's still somewhere in this $4 to $8 billion bucket. I'd probably say it's closer to this this stat here, about $2.4 billion on Instagram influencer marketing. I think that's what these guys are more so trying to get at, which is the money going directly to the producer to post a post on an influencer's account, tag that brand or tag that other account that's trying to gain followers or get customers or whatever it may be. This money, in no way, shape, or form, is being factored into GDP calculations. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, a few $1 billion, you got a $20 trillion economy. I don't think it's skewing the GDP numbers that much. But when you look at the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rates, that is where you see it. So this is September. Okay, unemployment rate hits a 50-year low. What are we at? Like 3.5%. Okay, you can kind of see. Here it is, right? I think the more interesting stat to look at is the labor force participation rate. So what is the labor force participation rate? This is basically saying what the unemployment rate is tracking are people that are working or recently looking for a job. I think in the past 6 months, looking for a job. With the labor force participation rate, it expands that. If you are not looking for a job, it still does not include you. But if you are somewhat looking for a job beyond the 6 months, then you are included. And so you can see here, we were at a high of around 66%, kind of right around when we had the crash in 2008. That came down. Now we're at about 63%, maybe a touch above that. We're between 63 and 64% labor participation. So if we have a 350 million population in the United States, it doesn't mean that 63% of that, say, 350 million people is working. What it is saying is of the portion of that 350 million people that would like to work, they may not be actively looking. That's the unemployment rate, but they would like to work. 63% or so of those people are working. Now, if let's say there's, I don't know, a couple 100 million people that fit that classification, I'm just broadly guessing here. So, people who are not in that. So if you're a student, you're not in labor force participation. If you're a home taker, you're not in labor force participation, right? So if you say it's a couple 100 million people, let's say you got 63% of that. Let's say you're around 120, 130 million people that are considered working as a part of that labor force participation. And then you go back to some of these stats and you look at just Instagram. And just Instagram is saying that there's 1.4, 1.5 million people with over 15,000 followers. And 40% of them are actual people, not companies or brands. Okay, so now you whittle that down to, I don't know, 5, 6, 700,000 people. Maybe they're not all in the US. Let's say you got a few 100,000 people, individuals in the US with at least 15,000 people following on Instagram. It's pretty legit. It's not bad. And by the way, I know that you can make decent money. I'm talking 5 figures kind of money. If you have, and actually what they say is if you have between 15 to 100,000 followers on Instagram, that sometimes is actually the most kind of avid audience follower base.
Right. You have much more active audiences potentially at those where some of the bigger accounts may have a lot more followers, but they're not as engaged with your content. So it's a measure of a mix of engagement and volume.
Yes.
And some of the lower accounts actually have really good engagement. So there's value there.
It's going to be very niche, right? And presumably highly engaged, very niche specific content, kind of like our show. If you were to add 300,000 people that say, these people are working. Maybe they're making $30, $40, $50,000, 130 million people. And I add 300,000 people on this little chart, which, by the way, the chart doesn't move very much. These are years.
That's just Instagram. That doesn't include, there are people
YouTube
that make their living on YouTube or
Twitter,
Twitch, all these different platforms out there. There's a lot of different creators, and that's just one category of folks basically that are doing this and making decent money off of it.
That's easily a multi-billion-dollar industry where those few 100,000 people obviously don't have all of that few $1 billion, right? But it's real money. And these stats, 1% of 130 million, okay, is 1.3 million. So then you would say, okay, if I have 300,000, again, these are back of the napkin numbers here, right. But let's say you get 25 basis points on this chart. Let's say you publish that to the stock market. That the labor force, look, the line doesn't move. It's been basically the same. It looks like it's gone up maybe 50 basis points, maybe 1% in the dip from here. What is this? Between 2015 and 2016 to now 2019, maybe it's gone up 1%. But then you say, you know what? If I was to add up Instagram, YouTube, all the content creator platforms, right? All of those. And then if you actually start to look at, for example, Uber drivers that are doing this part-time, maybe while they're in school, maybe while they're a home taker, what happens to those people? Because technically I'm a home taker, but maybe I'm driving for Uber. Homemaker. Maybe I'm driving for Uber 10 or 20 hours a week.
Right.
Am I now in the labor force? I would say so. At least by these stats, right? What about, selling stuff on Amazon, which we could look at the hundreds of thousands of people selling, making, 10 figures to low 6 figures.
People renting out apartments on Airbnb, same thing.
So this producer, this creator economy, this producer economy, I think is something we want to continue to chronicle.
Yeah.
And so if winner take all, if we were to publish our own stats on this, I would argue that these stats would actually be much higher. And this isn't something just magically because of 2019, but because of platforms, which over the past, I'd say probably 10 years have really come into their own. You absolutely have kind of this shadow economy that's not properly being factored
I would
into
call it the platform economy, or if you want to be more specific, the producer economy on those platforms.
Yep. Producer platform
it's
economy.
A new kind of work in the sense of how they relate to the platform, and it's one that when you talk from statistics to labor laws and all kinds of things is just not well accounted for.
Yep, agreed. So more to come on this, obviously. Hi, this is Alex Mozed. Thanks for joining us on Winner Take All. If you enjoyed the content today, which I bet you did, please comment, subscribe, and definitely message me on Twitter when we're doing live streams. Also, please note, all opinions expressed about stocks or public companies on the show are exactly that, opinions. This is not investment advice. Don't act on it. WisdomTree licensed Applico's Platform Insights data product to aid in the creation of the PLAT ETF. Thanks for joining us.